You already know the answer is supposed to be no. You've heard it 100 times. Money can't buy happiness. And yet, you check your bank balance 3 times a day. Not because you've forgotten the number. Because something in you is waiting for it to be different. That's not a character flaw. That's neuroscience. In 2010, Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist who literally invented the science of human judgment, published what should have been the final word on this question. His data showed that income does improve well-being, but only up to a point. And beyond that point, the mechanism completely changes. Today, we're going to follow that data exactly where it leads. Because the real answer to whether money buys happiness isn't yes or no. It's which kind of happiness, earned through which mechanism, and at what cost to the thing that actually matters. Before we go any further, we need to establish something that most coverage of this research gets completely wrong. Kahneman and his colleague Angus Deaton didn't measure one thing called happiness. They measured 2 entirely separate constructs. The first is life evaluation, your overall judgment when someone asks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good is your life? The second is emotional well-being, how you actually feel during the hours of your day, moment to moment. The anger, the joy, the anxiety, the calm. These 2 things behave completely differently when you expose them to income. And conflating them is where most of the confusion about money and happiness originates. The Kahneman and Deaton findings, drawn from a Gallup survey of over 400,000 Americans, showed that life evaluation keeps climbing with income. The more you earn, the better you rate your life overall. But emotional well-being, how you actually feel living that life, appeared to plateau. Beyond a certain income threshold, more money stopped improving day-to-day emotional experience in Kahneman and Deaton's original 2010 data. That threshold has been debated since the paper was published. A significant update came from a 2023 adversarial collaboration co-authored by Kahneman himself alongside psychologist Matthew Killingsworth. For most people, emotional well-being continues rising with income above the original threshold. The plateau effect that later work found applies primarily to people who are already emotionally unhappy, where money can help, but only up to a point. The picture is more nuanced than early coverage suggested. But the more important question remains, why does money affect well-being at all, and through what mechanism? In 1971, psychologists Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell introduced a concept that should have rewritten how we think about ambition. They called it the hedonic treadmill. The core observation: humans adapt. Remarkably, relentlessly adapt. You get a raise. For a few weeks, maybe a few months, your emotional baseline rises. Then something happens. The new salary becomes the expected salary. The anxiety about money doesn't disappear, it just recalibrates to a higher number. The treadmill keeps moving and you keep walking, never quite arriving. Brickman and Campbell found that this adaptation mechanism is not a failure of willpower or gratitude. It appears to be a fundamental feature of how the brain processes reward. Your brain is not designed to maintain euphoria. It's designed to detect change. Once income stops being a change and starts being the background condition of your life, it stops generating emotional response. A landmark 1978 empirical follow-up by Brickman, Coates, and Janoff-Bowman, testing the hedonic treadmill framework with actual lottery winners, found that major financial windfalls produced only temporary increases in emotional well-being. Within months, winners returned to near their pre-lottery baseline. This is why lottery winners and high earners often report similar emotional baseline levels to people who earn a fraction of their income. The data suggests the mechanism isn't the amount. It's the novelty of the amount. Here's the finding that should have stopped economists in their tracks. In 1974, economist Richard Easterlin analyzed happiness data from 19 countries. His conclusion: economic growth does not necessarily lead to greater happiness at the national level. Within a given country at a given time, richer people are happier than poorer people. But as an entire country gets richer over decades, average happiness stays roughly flat. This became known as the Easterlin Paradox, and it's been debated ever since. One explanation that emerged from subsequent research involves social comparison, the work of Leon Festinger from the 1950s on how humans evaluate themselves relative to others. If everyone gets richer at the same rate, your position relative to your peers hasn't changed. And research in this area suggests that relative position may matter as much to subjective well-being as absolute income. You feel richer not because your bank account grew, but because your account grew faster than your neighbor's. It's a deeply uncomfortable finding, because it means a significant portion of what we're actually chasing when we pursue wealth isn't an absolute standard of living. It's a ranking. And rankings, by definition, are zero-sum. We're about to get to the part of this research that almost nobody talks about. The part that actually changes the equation. Stay with me. So if money doesn't buy emotional happiness beyond a certain threshold, what is it actually doing in the Kahneman data? Why does life evaluation keep climbing even when day-to-day emotion plateaus? The answer that emerges from the research is autonomy. Control over time. Think about what higher income actually purchases beyond basic security. It purchases the ability to leave a job you hate without catastrophic consequence. It purchases the ability to choose your commute, your schedule, your geography. It purchases the right to say no without existential fear. Kahneman and Deaton's data showed that income has a positive effect on life evaluation. How you judge your life when you step back and look at it, even when it stops improving emotional well-being moment to moment. The most consistent interpretation in the research literature is that higher earners are not feeling better minute by minute, but they are experiencing less helplessness, less of the specific cognitive burden that comes from not having options. And evidence in this area suggests that perceived lack of control is one of the most reliable predictors of chronic stress and low well-being. The income happiness link, above a basic threshold, may not be primarily about consumption at all. It may be about the elimination of a particular kind of fear. This brings us to what may be the most psychologically uncomfortable finding in this entire literature. Festinger's social comparison theory predicts that well-being isn't calibrated to absolute conditions, it's calibrated to reference groups. And reference groups shift as income rises. At a certain income, you stop comparing yourself to your old neighborhood and start comparing yourself to the new one. You stop comparing yourself to colleagues and start comparing yourself to executives. The treadmill doesn't just apply to adaptation over time. It applies in real time, across social strata. This is why research in this area suggests that many high earners report feeling financially insecure despite objectively comfortable incomes. Their reference group has changed. Their anxiety hasn't been eliminated, it's been upgraded. What was once anxiety about rent has become anxiety about school fees, second properties, retirement portfolios at a certain threshold. The emotional texture is almost identical. Only the denominator has grown. Wilkinson and Pickett's work on income inequality suggests that societies with greater income inequality show worse outcomes on a range of well-being indicators, particularly for those lower in the distribution. Part of the proposed mechanism is exactly this: the constant visibility of the gap above you. The more visible the gap, the more relentless the comparison. If adaptation erodes the happiness value of material wealth, and social comparison constantly resets the target upward, is there any form of spending that escapes the treadmill? This is where the work of Thomas Gilovich at Cornell becomes directly relevant. His research found that experiences, travel, socializing, shared events, tend to produce more lasting well-being than equivalent spending on material possessions. The proposed explanation is that experiences are more resistant to direct comparison and adaptation. You can compare your car to your neighbor's car in absolute, measurable terms. You cannot compare your trip to Iceland to theirs in the same way. Experiences also tend to become part of your identity and your social narrative over time, while possessions tend to depreciate both in function and emotional salience. This doesn't mean material security is irrelevant. The research is clear that below a certain threshold of financial security, emotional well-being does suffer measurably. But above that threshold, the Gilovich data suggests the allocation of discretionary income matters considerably. Money spent on time, buying back hours, reducing commutes, outsourcing tasks that generate stress, aligns more closely with the autonomy mechanism we discussed earlier than money spent on status objects that reset the comparison reference upward. Everything we've covered so far comes from population-level data, large surveys, aggregate findings, and population-level data is extremely useful until you need to understand yourself. Here's what the aggregate obscures. Kahneman and Deaton found that income has a positive effect on life evaluation, but not uniformly on emotional well-being. But the variance within income brackets is substantial. Some people at every income level report high emotional well-being. Others at the same income level report low emotional well-being. What predicts the difference? Research in this area consistently returns to two variables that income affects indirectly more than directly. The first is time autonomy, how much control you have over how your hours are spent. The second is relationship quality, the depth and security of your close personal connections. Neither of these is simply purchased, but both of them are threatened by the particular form of work that most income generation requires in modern economies. Long hours, high-stress environments, constant availability. The work conditions that generate high income are frequently the same conditions that erode time autonomy and relationship quality. The data suggests this may be the real hidden cost of high-income pursuit, not tax, not lifestyle inflation, but the systematic dismantling of the two variables that most reliably predict daily emotional well-being. I want to be precise here, because this finding is frequently cited in a way that strips out what makes it interesting. Emmons and McCullough's research in 2003 found that practicing gratitude, structured reflection on what one already values, does have a measurable positive effect on well-being, and this effect is not limited to people at particular income levels. This is often presented as motivational content. Just be grateful. That framing misses the mechanism. The reason gratitude interventions appear to work is not psychological positivity. The proposed mechanism is that deliberate attention to existing positive conditions counteracts adaptation. The hedonic treadmill runs because the brain defaults to discounting what is stable and familiar. Gratitude practices appear to interrupt that default, not permanently, but measurably. For the purposes of this analysis, what's significant is that this is a mechanism entirely independent of income acquisition. It operates by changing how the brain processes existing conditions, rather than changing the conditions themselves. Which is exactly why it appears in the research as a genuine variable, not a consolation prize, but a separate lever on the same outcome. One final layer of complexity that the research demands we acknowledge. Diener and colleagues reviewed the evidence on income and happiness across multiple countries and found that the relationship varies considerably by cultural context. In societies where basic material security is not guaranteed, income operates closer to raw survival, and its effect on well-being is correspondingly larger and more direct. In high-income societies where basic needs are broadly met, the relationship becomes more mediated, more dependent on how income is used, what it replaces, and what psychological reference points define enough. Individual differences also modulate this considerably. Values around materialism, security orientation versus experiential orientation, and social comparison sensitivity all affect how strongly income tracks with reported well-being. This doesn't dissolve the findings we've covered. It contextualizes them. Kahneman and Deaton's data was drawn from American respondents. Easterlin's data spanned 19 countries. Gilovich's work was conducted at a Cornell University population. These are strong foundations, but they are not universal laws. The mechanism appears consistent. The magnitude varies. So does money buy happiness? The honest answer from the data is, yes, up to a threshold, through a specific mechanism, primarily the elimination of scarcity-driven stress and the purchase of autonomy over time. Beyond that threshold, the mechanism changes. Life evaluation continues to improve. Day-to-day emotional experience plateaus for those who are already emotionally unhappy, and continues rising for most others, as a 2023 Kahneman adversarial collaboration clarified. Social comparison resets the target upward, adaptation erodes the gains, and the particular work conditions that generate high income frequently cost exactly the variables, time, autonomy, and relationship quality, that most reliably predict daily well-being. The research doesn't tell you to stop pursuing income. Easterlin, Kahneman, Brickman, none of them concluded that. What the data consistently points to is a set of allocation questions. Once basic security is achieved, what are you actually buying with additional income? Control over your hours? Or the upgrade of your reference group? Experiences that resist adaptation? Or possessions that accelerate it? The question, does money buy happiness, is too blunt to be useful. The question the data actually supports is, what kind of spending, at what income level, through what mechanism, measured how? Answer that for your actual life, not the aggregate, and you'll have something more useful than a motivational poster and more honest than a platitude.